Welcome to another edition of Geopolitics and Empire. Support the transmission. Become a paid subscriber on the Substack. We do Zoom calls off the record with supporters only, and I do a weekly analysis of world events. You can purchase a consult if you want to chat with me about anything, expatriation, podcasting, geopolitics, or the meaning of life, as I like to tongue-in-cheek say. And do check out my affiliates. Leave a podcast review. And joining us for the first time, I've been wanting to get him on for a while, is Yasiru Ranaraja, who's a consulting specialist at China International Economic Consultants and the founding director at Belt and Road Initiative, Sri Lanka. Welcome to Geopolitics and Empire, Yasiru.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I've been following you for a while. Enjoy some of your commentary and analysis. And before getting your big picture view, anything you want to tell us about your work, your research, your interests, and the Belt and Road Initiative, Sri Lanka?
Yes, so I'm Yasiru. I'm originally from Sri Lanka. I'm mostly based in Colombo and Beijing. My background is I started as looking into the environment law, and through that, I saw the funding gaps for the developing countries, or what we call the developing economies, development finance. In fact, the lack of developing finance for the developing countries which are having right now. So through that, I found like how Belt and Road Initiative of Sri Lanka, Belt and Road Initiative of China have been an alternative way for the international finances. Through that, when I was reading my master's, I got more interested in this area, and together with few friends, we started an organization called BRISL. Through that, when we were doing various research on the region of geopolitics, of finances, of infrastructure development, we understood that how Sri Lanka is important in the coming 10 years, which is very strategically placed, in very close proximity to India, and with the growing economies in the region. So we got a lot of attention through that, and currently our research or areas of focus is mainly BRI, connectivity, logistics, geopolitical events in the region, and so on. So thank you for having me, and I'm planning to, continue this conversation.
Yeah, and before getting your further deep dive on Sri Lanka and Belt and Road, I do want to ask you sort of the big picture, which I'm very much concerned with, sort of the background context to everything that's going on with Belt and Road and Asia and the East is, I'm a Westerner, but I'm very critical of the American empire, and American exceptionalism. And I'm just curious, your perspective as an Easterner on the West, on the American empire, this so-called, unipolar hegemonic rules-based order. People are saying that it's on decline, and it's going to be we're transitioning to a new system, a multipolar, a more fair system. What are your thoughts on this global context that we find ourselves in?
Few things. You raised few questions. One is, yes, the American empire, the state and the empire, there are two things. So empire is the financial or the hegemonic control of the US. But I don't believe it's in any decline. I think there is a conversation about it, but I think the power which they had for the last 30 years, it's still there, but there is a threat from China and the Asian region, looking forward to the next century. Apart from that, when we talk about Belt and Road Initiative, let's to give like a brief introduction. One of the biggest, the challenges President Xi Jinping when he came to office in 2012, I would say that his trade routes were blocked from the Pacific and the Asian side and surrounding China, from the US military bases or US soft power or the allied countries for the US, but somehow he managed to strategically initiate, few initiatives. One is the Belt and Road Initiative. Other is to decentralize their trade networks, to have like a strategic network in order for them to trade, bypassing all the US sanctions and bypassing all the US military bases and all the other control regions. So I believe 10 years ago, the thinking of China helped Asian region to somehow, have an alternative model towards, the controlled trade structure which we had in the world. So today, 10 years later, the BRI has, done some impact or a challenge to the US in terms of having an independent or a decentralized trade route from Asia to the East Pacific, and if you take now Central Asia, South Asia, and other regions. So I believe that would be somewhat a challenge for the US. Apart from that, I think they still have their monetary power around the world, their influence power around the world. But as you said, there is some, from ground level, there is some uprise against the US of their hegemonic view. But I believe they are still powerful. They are economic-wise, they are powerful. And one of the most powerful factors of US I see is their ability to attract any good brain power which comes anywhere in the world. So that is something Indians or the Asians, if you say South Americans or the Chinese, should focus on, how to keep their talent in their countries and how to make sure, or how to have several programs which could attract these global talents to come and establish in their country. So this is something the US is doing very well. They have this as a black hole where they attract all the good technologies, innovations coming to the US. I think China is focusing on this. There are several initiatives domestically they have planned about, to attract expat crowds, to give financial support and some legal jurisdiction areas that they want to focus, especially on their private economy in the coming 10 years. So to start with, I would say a few things. Next 10 years is the most important 10 years for the Chinese, I think, in the whole of Chinese history, because as you know, China have said that they are going to grow at about 5 to 3%, I believe. And if it grows at that percentage, it will be a very strong economy in 10 years. At least 30,000, GDP per capita in 10 years in China. So that is a huge challenge for China to make many changes. Then we have India. It will grow at 5 to 6%. That means India would also, double its economy in 4 to 5 years. So that's a huge economic pace here in Asia. So that would leave a big united, region to trade, to have their own consuming markets, to have their own trade routes, their own, regional structures. ASEAN is a good model that we could look into. But said that, it won't happen that easy. As you see what's happening in India, Pakistan, we could see something in Bangladesh in the future. I would predict Myanmar. Even ASEAN countries could have some, destabilizing issues in the future. So though we say there is some shift in the world, these can be changed very easily, which happened in the Middle East as well. Middle East had a golden 30 years, in the 20 years, I would say, in the last, but they couldn't do anything major in that region because of, various issues that they had. So I would predict same would happen in the region. But to be honest, India and China and other regional countries are a bit aware of what's happening with the US. So as Kissinger said, no one want to be, friend or enemy of the US. They want to study how to manage. They don't want to lose their development times as well. But in terms of Sri Lanka, I'll make my last point. Sri Lanka is in a very strategic position, not now, but when India developed as a 8 to 10 trillion economy, that would be a probably we could say it could be the Taiwan or the Cuba for the US, or the Taiwan for China if it didn't properly navigate its affairs. To give you another example, Sri Lanka came out of a 30-year war, which was ended 10 years ago, I believe. So that war is a geopolitical war. If you look into the details of it, the administration or the leadership couldn't navigate Sri Lanka in a middle path, though we had officially non-aligned policy. During the Cold War, we were stuck between the USSR, India. China was not much involved. USSR, India, the Indo-Pakistan War. and so on. And we were managed. One of the regimes were very close to the US at the time, and the India was not comfortable with it. Given the whole, your audience can read the LTT, the war which we had. So LTT group, which the government fought, is a very small fisheries group. So one could question, how can a small group like this get, suicide squads, get, all these military weapons and all that. I'm not saying there wasn't the social, the local problem that is there, but on top of that, there was a huge geopolitical arm playing it across. So the point I want to make is, if Sri Lanka didn't navigate in a way that I would not say a balanced view, a strategic view, which is looking at the future. It could face major problems in the future. So that means there will be impact on the Belt and Road. There will be impact on the logistics, the ports that they are planning to strategize. So those are some of the areas that we look into.
Yeah, and just it's interesting again your opinion. I recently had on the Indian analyst Abhijit Chavda, and he shared your view on his on the assessment of the strength still of Washington. And this is why I like to break the echo chambers, because maybe for some of us in the West, we tend to think that Pax Americana is declining. And I'm on the fence. I can see what you're saying, that it's still very strong. Who else has almost 1,000 military bases across the planet? But you mentioned China building this connectivity, sort of decentralizing from the Western model of control. What are your thoughts when it comes to de-dollarization? We Xi Jinping and Putin met today. They're talking about how more and more countries are using less and less of the dollar, and they're using their own currencies in national bilateral trade. How do you see this factor of de-dollarization?
Yeah, which is true. The BRICS, the Continent Reserve Agreement, I think it was passed by the BRICS. It was very that was something that one of the biggest achievements of the BRICS nations, to have sort of that the agreement itself created the new development bank, which is in Shanghai. De-dollarization, in some sense, it could work, but I want to give two sectors. One is the military sector, and other is first the military sector. So if the US keep making very high tech equipment for military, eventually the dollar will be sent to that as well, because many countries would depend to get those weapons through USD. But you have seen how China and other countries are also coming with their military equipment. But the point is, as I said, whatever the innovation comes through inside US, it would also make the USD very stronger in the future. If their economy would manage to attract talent and attract systems in their country, so it would keep the USD at a state not as influenced as past. Some influence in the world. Apart from that, we see the hydrocarbons are getting, still not, but eventually it would, some predict in 10 years or 20 years, it would be less, used with electric cars and everything. That would also make countries, depend less on the USD. It's still difficult to say how it will go, because the alternative we have to the USD is either have the global use of other means of currency. But that, let's say if BRICS countries come in to such an agreement, yet there is a lot of challenges within the BRICS countries as well. Leave aside having a currency, the BRICS nations struggle to agree on a location to have a meeting. So there are a lot of mistrust, a lot of issues with this so-called global South. I believe still they need a lot of diplomacy to engage with each other. A lot of areas that they should come. I believe this is because most global South nations coming out of 200, 300 years of colonization. So their societies are not, even for example, in Sri Lanka, if anything comes from outside, either US, India, China, the locals tend to see it as a threat towards their, their existence or their ordinary living. So this is because generations, we can't, leave that out. This is because centuries of, some of the literature, you name it, movies, songs, many areas that was influenced through colonization. So these nations are unable to come into some sort of consensus or synergies that they could, but they are making progress. I'm not going to say there is not, like, one of the biggest achievements, I've told this before also, is about 30 countries coming to Beijing in 2014 or 17, I suppose 14, is to agree on the BRI, a regional initiative back in the day, and over 100 organizations were there. So I believe that sort of more countries understanding there should be an alternative way, and if they work through that in much more serious tone, I believe despite USD losing its influence, let's say, but if USD loses influence, there should be another currency, or there should be another system in the world. We have to go to another system. I mean, we can't come out of the system and have nothing. I was in a conference last week, and one of the questions that one of the attendees raised to a Chinese diplomat was, we are willing to come out of this US hegemonic view. We are willing to, leave out and have our independence. But what sort of a alternative can you give to us? So despite of these finances that we get from the IMF or the global financing giants, or the current formation of the world. So these are not easy things. I think China, India, and other even US, Europe, they are constantly looking into systems that could somehow manage their affairs or their region. So I don't think the US. I believe, as you said, I agree. There is some global conversation about the USD. There is some backfire towards it, but I don't believe it will lose its influence per se in the coming 10 to 15 years at least, because most of the Chinese economy is interlinked to the US. Their assets, some of the Chinese the foreign reserves China have is invested in US, though it's reducing, but the influence is a lot through these two economies as well. So we have to wait and see. Said that, even in the US, they also having their. I mean, you look at the elections; they're also saying we need to. The world is thinking something else, so we need to. That's why I believe Trump came into power, and his whole political argument is surrounding that. So he's also mobilizing the US in a way that we are not ready to give up. That is fair enough. I mean, any country would do that. But what we have to observe is that when the global south or the other countries mobilize, or when they build their own system, US also we would mobilize in a way that to overcome it. Yeah, that's what I want to say about the USD.
Yeah, and it just as you say, in the West, they're rushing to figure something out, and maybe the play seems to be digitizing the dollar, backing it by Bitcoin, something like that. Jeffrey Sachs a few weeks ago said what might replace the dollar and SWIFT is every country now onboarding its own CBDCs, and then those working sort of in an interoperable system, which would make the dollar obsolete. I've also read this week that you've had China create these gold exchanges, like in Shanghai, for convertibility into yuan and gold. And I think they just opened a vault in Hong Kong, and there's rumors that in Saudi Arabia they might open a vault, and then that would allow easier convertibility between Saudi and China, gold and yuan. And so that could be a pathway to something. What are your thoughts on the tariffs? Who's going to be the winner or the loser, or is it win-win or lose-lose?
I think it's a lose-lose. I believe both countries, the main two parties of tariffs is the US and the China. So I believe both countries have identified that it's not gonna give that influence, or it can't get the results that they are planning to have. I think China, I saw yesterday, China is willing to negotiate with the US. I believe China would come into some sort of agreement to buy energy or something with the US. Because trade deficit is true that there's, as I've also mentioned this with few Chinese, because they have to work through their trade, domestic state trade structure as well. Because if China is having surpluses with all countries, that would also mean a threat to China in the future, because one country coming up, that all the other countries will eventually have the same demands. So I believe in terms of trade, one thing the US didn't focus is the service sector. I think there are many people told that the service sector in US is having a lot of surpluses through service sectors. But Trump never mentioned that. He only mentioned the surpluses through production and other things. So that's why China is focusing on these service sectors, as American movies or banking sectors and so on. But in coming future, in coming days, I think China would realize, because China is also have their own challenges in their domestic economy. Let's say unemployment, or their aging population, their growing middle class, all of this. So it's not the best time for Chinese itself to go to such form of trade war with the US. It won't show any advantages for any countries, as I see. India have done quite well negotiation with the US. I suppose they agreed to buy some military weapons. So one of the areas I look at is the outside story of this. You say the big picture of it. What are they planning through this trade war? Is China really a threat to the US? Probably in some terms, but is there a bigger threat to US than China? If you look at it, so if you say when US started to recognize China, that is in 1970s, late 1970s. Before that, US made sure that China is surrounded and China is structured inside, in a position that US could control. In a day, China is a developed or a strong economy. So that is today. So let's say it's been how long? Maybe 30, 40 years. China is a strong country, but still China, let's say take Taiwan. China's huge economy, 20 trillion economy, but they can't, do, any structural damage to Taiwan. Why is that? I don't know. Like it was, designed in a way that, they can't move around the Pacific as well. If you see, China has the biggest naval fleet, but it just surrounds the let's say South China Sea. So why is this? I think when US were doing the negotiations with China back in the day, they managed to structure war games that one day China would be surrounded like this. But what we have to see today is not China. What we have to see today is what will happen to India, because India, South Asia, is the most weakest. In terms of US military, it's the weakest position of the US. They have only 1 or 2 bases surrounding India. So now India is growing. In 10 or 15 years, if India says something, how can US, give some resistance? There's no way to resist India in this state, because they have somehow built their independence in a way that they I would say not as China, but even the surrounding countries are not much aligned to India, the US or China, not China, to the US. So I would say this trade war would also have a negotiating hand, where they would try to negotiate either military weapons or some form of alliance with these countries. Let's say countries surrounding India, Pakistan or Bengali or Sri Lanka, Maldives, Myanmar, Central Asian countries. These are the things that we should see what are the negotiations that the US would do when it comes to their trade tariffs. That is the main. I believe the purpose of these tariffs is for Trump's administration to bring these people bring these countries to the negotiating table and have an upper hand during the negotiations. So this is something that we should closely focus on how US will position itself surrounding India, because for China is historically known as I mean I'm not completely leaving out China, but compared to India, it's less of a non-aggressive country in terms of, because they benefit from US economy as well. As far as US is not disturbing the Chinese, I don't believe that Chinese are very pro business community, and they're culturally they're too much into trading. And if you see the numbers also, US and Chinese businesses and connections are much more greater in terms of so this as even through the views of their political the Henry Kissinger, they would always have a good connection with China compared to India. So to answer your question, what I would see the trade tariffs is that it's a lose-lose for both. I think in the very near future, the tariffs will go off. They would come to some negotiations. Either China would buy much more trade from the US, or they would settle it off. We have to look into the service sectors. So, a lot, even China, they would much more, people who follow China know that these, like in next year, I think they have the 15th 5-year plan. That is the last 15th plan before they become like a high income country. So these days, who are familiar with China knows that Chinese government is doing like regional, city-wise, province-wise, big financial or economic, analysis or positioning, planning of the economy in a way that how China could be ready as a high-income country. So they have several initiatives. One is new productive forces, the one village, one product. They're redesigning their internal supply chains, internal economies in a way that could sustain itself in a major crisis situation. So given these areas, I believe China would not want to go too much more aggressive, place with the US. But you have seen Xi Jinping having a very strong stand on the US. But I believe that is basically to address his domestic politics, to show that he's sort of he's in a tough position with the US. That would create him good political situation for him domestically within their regional leaders and all that. So that's what I would see.
Yeah, and on your social feeds, I see you all over the place. You're traveling in China and Sri Lanka, elsewhere. You're going to these conferences. You're speaking to government officials, businessmen, and I'm just curious, what's the vibe, amongst the Chinese, amongst the Indians, the Sri Lankans, the Vietnamese, whatever. What's the word on the street? Are people generally optimistic? They're living life. They're happy. Are they worried economically? And what are some other things that they're thinking about, whether it's Belt and Road and development or other things on people's minds?
That's a big question, but I'll tell you about China. China is sort of, as I said, their domestic economies are much more structured now. So their local leaders, and most of the things they do is to somehow even to have an assessment of what's happening inside China and how it can contribute to their domestic economy. That is, I think, one of the main things. The attitude in China is that in terms of external affairs, the US trade war is much more it's in the media in China as well. But I think this is just to give a political hand for the Communist Party. You have some sort of a risk or a challenge that would unite the people inside China. That is there. On terms of India, I think India is more aggressive than China towards the US. I think the general population, they are much more damaged through their I would say colonization, but if you see the Indian media, Indian journalists, analysts, most of them are sort of thoroughly against the US or a hegemonic, that the US is doing. But I believe the BJP, the current government, is sort of trying to balance it out, but I don't think it's very successful. If India continues to go that way, the popularity of this strategy would reduce. And some say the Indian foreign policy is very successful. They get, but I doubt it. They are struggling with their foreign policy. Their regional countries are, you see what's happening now around India. Plus, India came into few military agreements with the US that is also thoroughly criticized by some of the Indian, diplomats and policymakers. So I believe seeing China as a threat to India would help India to align with the US as well. So you should read that hand as well. So US keep pushing, giving statements that China is the threat, but eventually what would you gain by telling China is a threat? Is that US get the ability to align with other countries saying China is the threat? But if you look at the other side of the coin, we might would see China is not much of a threat to the US as they believe, at least militarily, not economically. Other countries, per se, in Asian region, as I mentioned, the ASEAN is a good model. They have somehow managed to build some synergies between their nations. I believe Philippines also going for elections. If Duterte, their former president's party, come into power, then much of the relations with China would develop. But whatever said and done, if we talk about this, the Asian trading bloc, we can't leave out China and India both. We have to take big consideration of them because these are big countries, especially China, because it's I would say 10 years ahead of the Indians in terms of their economy. So there is a drive from these local regional leaders as well against the US and against what's been happening with the US. And US have failed to have a good communication strategy or a unified external engagement with this growing backlash against the US, especially after the Arab Spring. It was very much, many countries were against that. So I was in an event in Chongqing, which was organized by the International Department of the CPC Central Committee, and there were many political leaders there, very surprisingly, like South Africans, Brazilians. A big delegation was there. I didn't meet anyone from Mexico, but many local politicians, not only the government, but so I've had the chance to engage with many African countries, Zimbabwe. So they had a unified view against the current system, current changes which are happening, and the tariff war is also have somehow gone towards a position where all countries think that US is trying to bully the other country. So that is sort of, but US could have done it much more strategically, much more smartly, in a way that, it could actually bring some benefit to their economy and in their people. Vietnam, of course, they are in a very good position. I would say Vietnam is having the, very, very attractive and very effective foreign policy. They've managed to work with the Chinese, and now Indians also, they have good connections. They keep connections with the US as well, and the economy is somewhat, getting very powerful. Most of the companies which are moving out of moving out of China is planning to reestablish in Vietnam. Korean companies, Japanese companies, and so on. Vietnam is actually in a good position. So I believe the regional countries, if the differences can be, and it could continue. It's fine. I mean, European countries also have differences. I believe South American, South North American countries also have differences, but it should not limit themselves coming in together to understand a common strategy for region. So that is something. It's very important for the region, I believe.
Let me ask you about the technology, the tech sphere, the tech wars, artificial intelligence, the semiconductor chips, EVs, electric vehicles, digitalization. And so, it seems like the US has the upper hand in some areas. DARPA created the internet. Silicon Valley is strong in many regards with all of the Amazons and all that. But then in other areas, China seems to be more advanced with the Huawei and all these, the high-speed trains that are being built out, connectivity. We don't have that in the West, and so how do you see the tech war? I've read Kai-Fu Lee. It seems the West has the upper hand with AI right now, but some say China will eventually surpass. How do you see all of that?
One of the things, I mean, what everything you said is very true. I agree with it, but I want to answer this question in this way. One of the most strongest branches of China is their governance, the ability of their governance to make reforms and to somehow understand different views which are coming out of the society. I mean, they are not. Most people say China is a communist country, and it's very authoritative regime. But we can argue that which could be true. But my point is, China is somewhat knowing their areas which they want to develop is something very powerful that they would plan it in a way that could find these new technologies to come into their shows. So, but my point is, what's happening in the root level goes to the top branches at a very short period of time. So that is something very powerful in the Chinese system, how they have created their political system in a way that those kind of threats, those kind of opportunities, those kinds of innovation or policy-wise changes could go to the top seats at a very short period. That is, I believe, one of the strengths of China that, if someone is fearing China, that is just something that they should fear. Because let's say any new technology, as you said, semiconductors, they have, I think in also chip technology, they have various that they want to develop. AI also, they are doing quite well. Despite that, this is natural development in their society. Many private companies would come in, they would make the changes. As you know, as I said before, China is more focusing on their private economy in the coming 10 years, because I would say they would adopt many policies to support their private economy in the coming years. So one of the things the government is doing is giving the facilitation for these new companies, new technologies to come and establish in their country. So we could see in the future they would give much more flexible policies, much more flexible assistance for many investors, many Chinese companies that they are boosting in their country. Somewhere position in China, what we called an economy which could be trusted by outsiders. Now it's sort of still people are, very few expats move to China. It's not as you as anyone. I mean, given the arguments or the criticism, still anyone would want to go to US, and they're much more comfortable to go to US compared to China. I mean, with the majority. That is because how they have built their system, jurisdictionally, their judiciary independence, their other assistance they could give through the economy. So I believe China would copy that form of model in the coming 10 years, where they would want these free companies trade big giants to come and establish in the Chinese economy. And I would also see China would also let go of most of the state upper hand on many companies that they keep under as state-owned enterprises. So they would keep the companies which are more important to China and release more of the companies to the market in the future. So this is in few areas as EVs, China is having mass production here. I went to a Xiaomi factory a few months ago. It's crazy, huge factory. They're building same mega factory just just in the opposite side of their current factory. So I believe they're increasing production. They're going to go to the global markets as well. The cars are very cheap. Yeah, I don't know you can get a sports car for Xiaomi about less than 30,000 USD. So these are like super speed cars. Go to 200 kilometers per hour in 2-3 seconds. As I said, they would go each area. They would focus. They would go to the international market and try to capture their. And other sector that they would focus is the service sector, which is lacking currently in China. Service sector is still dominated mostly by the US. So I believe China would also make more focus because, as I said before, when China become a high income country, you can't consistently depend on the manufacturing industrial means of economy. These are the things that China, they are also doing a lot of research, a lot of areas for agriculture, for automation, AI, and so on. So the core point I want to give is, as I said at the start, what we have to focus is the ability of the Chinese administration to reform its economy in a way which is very effective compared to what we see in Europe and US. We can't compare the both structures. What I say is very effective compared to the European or the American policymakers. That doesn't mean that Europe is having bad system or US having bad system. What I want to point out is the effectiveness of China is something that people should focus, because that way we would see the areas of the economy which are struggling or areas of the economy that they are bearing fruit would go up or down, because the policymakers push them where they want in a very effective way. So that is something I want to focus here.
Yeah, I've seen all over Mexico now the Chinese EVs, BYD. I think so. I've seen some of the price tags that I've seen were kind of expensive. Like in a shopping mall in Mexico, I think they said something like $40,000. But I read recently in China they created a $15,000 EV, and so a lot is going on there. I have to ask you about the social credit system. Does it exist? Does it not exist? Does it kind of exist? What's going on there?
Yeah, social credit system. It's not a big deal, as I've seen a few articles in like Western media. They're saying like they are giving social credit to everything, but it's not like they are central. They don't focus it in a way that government is controlling them. I believe the general citizens have various other problems compared to social credit system. But I would want to point out they are doing a huge nationwide CCTV system, and probably if you come to China, many would see how their traffic lights are now using big data, machine learning, all this. If even in the Baidu app, you can see the traffic light. How long to take to changing the colors of the lights. Eventually they will use this data to predict traffic or do new trade routes and so on. In terms of social credit system, the things I've read, I don't believe it's effective. Probably there are some branches of government which are focusing in a system. As I said before, there could be various systems in China. I mean, it's a huge government compared to what we see Some of the areas might not work. So these areas would not go further. It would have few, if there is resistance towards this, they would amend it, or they would do the reforms. So as they say, they have social credit for and they can block their IDs and passports. There were some topics regarding that, but I believe this won't go forward. But general population is in favor of automation and not automation, about this, the network of civilian, what do you call, where they use CCTV to give services to different, I went to a village a few weeks ago. They had a system where their elderly, they wear a watch which tracks the heartbeat, and it goes to their centralized, like a smart screen of their county administration. And if the elderly person having some sort of health issue, or let's say a heart attack, there is a communication channel that goes through the hospital and to take him out of their homes to the hospital. So my point is, they're sort of very pro into this digitalization form. If you come to China, everything, there is no paper money in China. I mean, very less to none. Everyone uses their phone to buy anything, like even the street, small shops, pedestrians, everyone uses digital services. So they are sort of integrating into that in a way which I've heard from the Europeans or the Americans who are in China. They are much more convenient in doing things with terms of digitalization of their currency. But social credit system, I haven't much looked into, but it's not a huge topic here as I've seen in some media in the Western.
Yeah, well, we touched on a lot. You answered some of my questions. Even with war, another thing I'm concerned with, the Chinese embassy just published today, and they said, for maintaining its own hegemonic interest, the U.S. repeatedly uses China as a pretext, attempting to turn the Asia-Pacific region into a powder keg and certain countries into cannon fodder, which seriously undermines the safety, well-being of the people in the region. Because we've seen, you mentioned different flashpoints, but also South Korea recently. The former head of South Korea attempted to implement martial law, and possibly, maybe at Washington's behest, possibly start war with North Korea. And you mentioned Philippines, which is integrating militarily with the U.S. and Japan said they want to host nuclear weapons. And so there is that danger in the future of a military conflict. But is there anything else that I haven't asked that you think is important regarding Asia?
What you mentioned, it's very important. We have to see the grooming problems like South Koreans, Philippines, South Asia, even the Middle East. I look at Asia a lot, but these are the things that could trigger at any time. And as you said, as we spoke, how powerful US is, they also have their very efficient way. One of the most powerful things US have in their hand is their ability, their quality of their diplomats. Not the ones we see on TV, but they have the ability to go into their lowest social structures, negotiate, and get things done in a more efficient way compared to China or other regional countries. So this is something that you have a very great network of followers, listeners. These are the areas that you should look into in the future. That if something to go off in South Korea or North Korea, what are the issues that we would face? Regional economies, China, Russia, these countries in that region will have major problems. So that's something else. So I think I touched many of those things. I think what's most focused for me is how the Indian Ocean or the South Asian nations would navigate in the coming years. That is one of my main focus. How the world will be in another 20-30 years when India becomes at least a 10-15 trillion economy. what are their demands, and how would we have seen how China react in the South China Sea. They fire this water from their coast guard. So will it be the same in the Indian Ocean? Will India fire water, or they would just fire the boats? Or we don't know. So these are things that we should look into, and I'm also following your podcast. It's very informative, and I enjoy very much the speakers you bring here.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm just going to say, this is my opinion. If I had to bet, if I was forced to bet on the India-Pakistan terror incident, I think that it was Western deep state false flag operation where they made this attack, and it wasn't India or Pakistan. And that's often how they get this division and conquer, where they get them fighting with each other. And even the Pakistani defense minister came out and said that the West has backed terrorist organizations. And
exactly.
So that's my current theory, that it was maybe not even India nor Pakistan, but the Western hand coming in, dropping a bomb off, and both of them now fighting each other. But we'll see. Hopefully it does not escalate. Where all of your links will be in the description, but where are the best places people can find you, follow you?
I'm mostly in Twitter, in X. Apart from that, LinkedIn and Facebook a little, but mostly X is the best way to contact with me. And I post many things regarding Asia, China, and so on. Yeah.
And the website is brisl.org.
Yeah, www.brisl.org.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on the podcast, Yasiru.
Thank you very much for having me. It's very nice, talking to you.